Hello, my name is Darren Cawthon, and tonight I'm going to give a quick presentation on how to use the MvcTurbine MVC Turbine blade. This embedded view blade will wire up any embedded views in any DLL you reference and then include them in your MVC application. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use the Nerd Dinner example, and I'm going to move the account views to a separate DLL and then make the application run as if I had really made no changes at all. So to get started, you see I have Nerd Dinner. First step, of course, is to add a reference to the embedded view DLL, MvcTurbine.EmbeddedViews.dll. Since this is an MVC Turbine blade, just by adding a reference to the DLL, I've injected this embedded view functionality into my application. The next step will be to make the separate DLL, so I'm going to do that now. Now, this is my opinion. You don't have to do it this way, but I would recommend that you always start with an ASP.NET MVC2 empty web application, and I'll explain why in a bit. So for now, I'm going to call this dinner.accounts. Okay. Next step is to delete all of the extra stuff. And since this is not an MVC application that's going to be run by itself, the extra stuff is pretty much everything, even global.asax. You can see now I have a nerddinner.accounts, and all it has is a views directory and 2 configuration files. Okay. Next step is to bring over the views. So you see I have 4 account views. I'm going to cut them and paste them into the nerddinner.accounts. And the next step is, and this is one I forget often, but in order for this view to be included in your application, since it's in a separate DLL, it needs to be an embedded resource. So what you do is you right click on the view, go to properties, and then under build action you just select embedded resource. Okay, next step is, and I forget this pretty often too, is to add a reference to that assembly I just made. So, oh wait, sorry, let me knock this down to 3.5. Okay. Try that again. I'm going to add a reference to the DLL I just created, nerddinner.accounts. And that's it. So I'm going to run my application. Go log on, and you can see I'm actually looking at account views that are in a separate DLL. And that's really all there is to it. Now I'll explain kind of why I did some of the things the way I did them. I'm going to open up the register view, which I've converted into the, actually sorry, one second real fast. I forgot I had an input model. So let me move that to my new assembly. This input model is just a plain data object that represents a form post. The form post from the accounts, or I'm sorry, from the register page. And since I moved the views, I should move the input model with it. Okay. I just noticed because it was showing an error up here. So anyway, I'm using the MVC2 features where I set the view page to be a generic against my input model, and then I can use these great little HTML helper methods, label for, and I can pass it a lambda that represents my view model. Now, if you remember those two configuration files I kept around, here's the reason why. Let's say I delete one of them. Once I delete it, then the IntelliSense stuff that I like to have in my views goes away. So that's one of the configuration files. If you get rid of the configuration file in your root, it's even worse. Now, you don't actually need all of this XML in order to get the IntelliSense to work the way you want, but I don't like to really parse through and read this kind of stuff, so I just keep the files the configuration files the way they are. It doesn't really hurt anything to have them there. They're not going to be compiled into your application anyway, so it's just something you have to deal with. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you do not set the build action to embedded resource, the view, it's as if the view doesn't exist. So like I said before, I forget this all the time. I'll make a view, I'll forget to set this, and I hit the page and I don't get a view. So just remember that to set that as an embedded resource. Another thing to keep in mind is, since these are embedded in the DLL, and that happens when the DLL is compiled, it means that if you make a change to this DLL, as I'm doing now, I won't see my changes until I recompile the application. So this can be kind of a pain if you're making a whole bunch of small little changes to your application, especially near the end of the application when you're just doing some cleanup. So what I sometimes do is, if I know I need to do a whole bunch of small little changes just to make it work, I'll actually I'll cut the views, paste them back into web where I don't need to recompile to make changes, and I'll make them here, and once I know that I'm done, I'll move them back to the separate DLL. The neat thing about this embedded view blade is that it doesn't really matter what DLL these views are in, so long as they follow the standard MVC convention. And one more tip to think about is if you happen to get a weird error on a view, like if you make changes to it and then you recompile, and when you hit the view you get a sequence error, only thing I can suggest is to clean your solution and then rebuild, and it'll go away. But that's all I really have. The embedded views are pretty easy to use. If you have any questions, you can always email me at darren@cawthon.com. Thank you.